Your image, my edit. Hi, this is John. I'm here again processing one of your images. This one is from Laurianne d'Avignon in France again, 2 in France in a row, fantastic. And I'll see what she's got. So Laurianne sent me actually several images that look as though they've been taken in New York. Some of them are interesting, some of them I find less interesting, but I've decided to choose this picture of the Brooklyn Bridge to edit. Now, to start off with, let's have a look at the camera settings. It was taken with a 24mm STM lens, f2.8, that's a pancake lens. It's a great travel lens, it's nice and small. And it was shot ISO 100, great, nice sunny day, you don't need a high ISO. f2.8 at 1/16,000, that's quite a narrow depth of field. And I think that's the main critique I've got for the settings is the f2.8. For this image, it's really not required. You're focusing so far away at f2.8 that actually the depth of field is quite deep. You'll be fast approaching the hyperfocal distance. This is the focus distance where basically everything after it will be in focus. And when you look at the image just on the screen, the only effect you have of narrow depth of field and bokeh or any blurriness is just on this one cable, so it looks a bit strange. I would have rather shoot at f5.6 or even f8 at a lower shutter speed. You could keep the ISO low, you would have got a sharper image, and that's just my opinion. I chose this image in particular because of a composition mistake, or a composition because of the composition which I don't particularly like. Now, it looks like Laurianne is trying to get it centered to have a nice symmetrical image. You know, you've got this, the archway, there's actual pillars holding up the suspension cables. It seems to be perfectly in the center of the frame. But the problem is she's obviously put the camera between one of these gaps in the cables and tried to shoot. Nice idea, but it's not symmetrical. So if you're going to go for symmetrical, you have to make it dead on symmetrical. Now, if you're going for a slight skew, make it for a skew, shoot off slightly to the left than the right or anything else. But what you've done here is nearly and not quite in both of these situations. So I find that a little bit troubling to look at. When you first look at the image, you go great, but then as you look at it longer, I find it more and more confusing. So composition-wise, this is a nearly but not quite. So what I'm going to show you is what I would do to try and rectify that, and it's basically cropping. So because you've got this slight skew in the image, you can see it here because you can see all the mesh on this bit, but only a slight little bit of mesh on this bit. You need to accentuate it, you need to go with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to crop it down. Now by cropping it down and placing the actual suspension part slightly to the right, it compensates for the skew that you've put into the image, and I think that this makes a slightly better crop. So before I crop it though, I've noticed that it's not quite perfectly straight, so I'm going to get out my angle tool and I'm just going to drag it across to make sure it's straight, perfectly straight, because when you're doing with all these lines and everything else, it needs to be straight as possible. Yep, that's a bit straighter. Enter. So I've just cropped it down. It's very cropped in now, but you can see how, because of the slight skew you had in the image, it fits better with the composition, because this isn't directly in the center, it's slightly to the right, which makes sense to you seeing more on the left. Now, the actual editing of this image, I'm going to share with you one of my presets. So, black and white, I like to process my images in black and white. I don't do it all the time, but when I do it, I notice I tend to process similar images in a similar way. This has a lovely blue sky, it was shot on a lovely clear day, and this would work well with a black and white preset I have called Dark Skies. You click on this, boom. So the skies come rather grey, you get a high contrast. So you can see here the settings that this preset put in, it puts in high contrast, brings up the shadows a bit, blacks are pulled down, clarity comes up. This is what's giving it a really quite nice strong black and white, and you see the tone curve, it has got like a strong contrast, so it's a strong contrasty image. I use presets as a good starting point. So this has made a high contrast image, and I think with all the lines and the light and everything else, I think this works well, but I want to tweak it a little bit. In particular, I want to see a bit more of the brickwork. So I'm going to bring up the exposure just a little bit, but what I am going to bring up is the shadows. By bringing up the shadows, I'm not affecting the highlights or the midtones, just the dark areas, and this way you can see the brickwork. And that's it. Post-processing and editing images does not have to take time. The more you do it, the quicker you can come at it. This is one of the quickest one I've done because I saw the image and I saw it would work well with one of my presets. I'm going to share my black and white dark skies preset with you. You can see a link to that on my website. It will be part of my blog post. Feel free to download it, use it, do whatever the hell you want with it. I'm completely cool with that. Use it as a basis to manipulate and make your own presets. Okay, I hope that was useful. Keep sending in these images for me to edit. I really enjoyed it. I'll try and do it as much as possible. Okay, I'm John Rowell. I hope that was useful.